Midlife Reinvention, How Romance Revealed My Hidden Strength at 50. A woman's complete journey to self-discovery, authenticity, and empowerment. You know that moment when you think you have everything figured out? When you wake up one morning and everything feels settled, predictable, and exactly as it should be? When the pieces of your life fit together in a way that makes sense, even if that sense is built more on habit than on genuine fulfillment? When you look around and see a life that is comfortable, secure, and respectable in every measurable way? I had that moment. I was 50 years old, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States, surrounded by the life I had carefully constructed over 3 decades. A career that was meaningful but not demanding. A family that had grown into adulthood. Routines that were comforting in their predictability. Everything was in its place. Everything made sense. Everything felt safe. And then something unexpected happened that would change everything I thought I knew about myself, about strength, about what it means to truly be alive at 50. Something that would crack open the carefully constructed world I had built and force me to confront the woman I actually was underneath all the roles and responsibilities. And that something was romance. Not the kind of romance you read about in novels with passionate declarations and dramatic moments. Not the kind with grand gestures and promises of forever. But a quiet, unexpected connection with another human being that became a mirror reflecting back who I could be if I was brave enough to stop pretending, stop hiding, and start living authentically. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I'm about to tell you a story that isn't just about romance, though romance is central to it. It's about how romance became a mirror that showed me who I could be. It's about how being truly seen by someone else helped me finally see myself. It's about midlife reinvention, about discovering hidden strength that had been waiting inside me all along, and about learning that your 50s might be the most empowering decade of your life if you're brave enough to embrace the journey. This is a story about waking up when you didn't even know you were sleeping. This is a story about becoming visible when you had perfected the art of disappearing. Let me take you back to the beginning of my story, to the woman I was before romance arrived with its unexpected gifts and challenging questions. I was 20 years old when I married Richard Parker. 20. Do you remember being 20? Do you remember feeling like you had your whole life figured out? Like you knew exactly what it was supposed to look like and you were certain you could make it happen? Like the future was a clearly marked path that you just had to follow? I did. I had this image so clear in my mind, a vision of what success looked like, what love looked like, what a good life was supposed to be. A successful husband who provided. Check. Richard was handsome, ambitious, and stable. He worked in finance. He had a 5-year plan. He had the kind of confidence that made you believe he could accomplish anything. He was the kind of man you were supposed to want. Children. Several of them. Check. And I wanted them to have everything I had. Everything I didn't have. Everything that would make them happy. A home. A neighborhood. A life that looked right from the outside. And for 30 years, I organized my entire existence around making sure that vision became reality. Over the next 30 years, we built something substantial together. We had 5 children, each one a distinct personality, each one requiring different kinds of love and attention and sacrifice. Michael, my eldest son at 28, responsible and calm, the kind of son who protects his siblings without being asked. The one who learned early that his job was to be strong for everyone else. Emily, my eldest daughter at 27, compassionate and creative, always trying to keep the peace between everyone. The peacemaker who learned that her value lay in smoothing over conflict. Daniel, my second son at 25, adventurous and sometimes rebellious, the kind of son who challenges the rules and pushes boundaries. Olivia, my second daughter at 23, independent and strong-willed, pursuing her passions without apology, though she learned that independence from watching what happened when a woman made others her priority. And Joshua, my youngest at 22, thoughtful and intelligent, the quiet observer who watches before acting, the one who learned that being quiet and undemanding was the safest way to move through the world. We lived in a suburban neighborhood that represented the American dream. A nice house with a well-maintained yard. Neighbors who knew our names. Schools and parks and the kind of safety that comes from routine and predictability. A life that looked like success from the outside. We had in-laws who loved us. Richard's father, Thomas Parker, now 78, a wise and traditional man who valued family above all else. Richard's mother, Margaret Parker, now 75, caring and nurturing, the kind of woman who made everyone feel welcome at her table, though I sometimes wondered if she saw how much of myself I was disappearing into the role of wife and daughter-in-law. By the time I reached 50, I had perfected the life I was supposed to live. I had learned to be the woman everyone needed me to be. The supportive wife who made decisions that prioritized her husband's career and comfort. The devoted mother who sacrificed her own interests and time for her children's well-being. The reliable professional who showed up and did good work without making waves or asking for anything more. The good friend who listened to everyone else's problems without burdening them with her own. The trustworthy family member who kept the peace and held things together. I showed up. I did what was expected. I managed, organized, and held things together. I was invisible in the most successful way possible. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do, and no one, including myself, questioned whether I was actually happy. I performed contentment so well that I almost believed it myself. I had become an expert at being what everyone else needed, and in the process, I had lost track of who I was when no one was watching. But here's the thing about being perfectly invisible. It works until it doesn't. It works until something happens that makes you question everything. It works until you meet someone who looks at you and actually sees you. It works until romance shows up and asks the question you've been avoiding for 30 years. Who are you when no one else is looking? Who are you when you're not performing the role? Who are you beneath all the obligations and expectations? Who are you at your core, stripped of all the ways you've learned to be useful and necessary? That's when everything changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But gradually, like a door opening slowly, revealing a room you didn't know existed inside yourself. Romance came into my life in a completely unexpected way. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't ready for it. I had made peace with the idea that passion and excitement and the kind of love that made your heart race were things for younger women. But it arrived anyway, carrying with it a mirror that showed me a reflection I didn't recognize. In that reflection, I saw a woman I thought I had lost years ago. I saw potential. I saw possibility. I saw strength that I didn't know I possessed. I saw the girl who had wanted to paint before she became too busy with life. I saw the young woman who had wanted to travel before she became responsible for 5 children. I saw the person who had wanted to be creative, adventurous, alive, before she learned that those desires were selfish and inappropriate. The romance itself wasn't the most important part of the story, though. That's something I want to be very clear about from the beginning. The romance wasn't the solution. It wasn't the answer to some empty feeling I had been carrying. The romance was the catalyst. It was the spark that ignited something that had been dormant inside me for so long that I had forgotten it existed. The romance was the mirror, and what I saw in that mirror changed my life forever. When someone looks at you and truly sees you, really sees you in a way that no one has in years, it does something to you. It activates something. It wakes something up. And once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep. Once you realize that someone finds you interesting, that someone is attracted to your mind and your thoughts and your quirks and your unique way of seeing the world, you start to question all the ways you've made yourself smaller. You start to wonder about all the dreams you've put aside. You start to ask yourself whether the life you've been living is actually the life you want to be living. That's what romance revealed to me. Not that I needed a man to complete me. Not that happiness comes from being in a relationship. But that I had value as a person beyond my roles and responsibilities. That I had thoughts and feelings and desires that mattered. That my presence in the world was significant, not because of what I did for other people, but because of who I was as a human being. Let me tell you about the woman I was before that mirror appeared. I was competent. I was reliable. I was the person you could count on to show up, to help, to be there when you needed someone. I had built a career in nonprofit work that was meaningful without being overwhelming. I had managed to contribute to the world in a way that made me feel like I was doing good, without letting it interfere with my primary role as wife and mother. I had raised 5 children, each one unique, each one loved deeply, each one given more of my attention and energy than I gave to myself. I had maintained a marriage for 30 years. We had built a partnership that worked on a practical level. We knew how to function as a team. We had solved the logistics of living together. We had developed comfortable rhythms and patterns. On paper, my life looked successful. It looked full. It looked like everything a woman was supposed to want. But inside, there was a quietness. Not a peaceful quietness, but the kind of quietness that comes from not speaking up. The kind that comes from swallowing your words, your needs, your desires, year after year until you forget you ever had them. I had learned to make myself small. Not in a visible way, but in a way that mattered deeply. I had learned to prioritize everyone else's needs before my own. I had learned to be content with crumbs when I deserved a whole meal. I had learned to accept a quiet, stable marriage when I could have had something more vibrant, more alive, more real. I had learned to hide the parts of myself that might inconvenience others. The parts that wanted things. The parts that had dreams. The parts that wanted to be touched and desired and seen as beautiful. The parts that wanted to have conversations about ideas and feelings instead of just logistics and schedules. The parts that wanted to laugh and be spontaneous and take risks. I had learned that these parts of myself were selfish, and I had stuffed them down so thoroughly that I almost forgot they existed. My relationship with Richard was comfortable. That's the word I would have used if anyone had asked me about it. Comfortable. We had routines. We had a division of labor. We understood each other in the way that 2 people who have spent 30 years together understand each other. We knew each other's patterns and moods and preferences. But we had stopped seeing each other. We had stopped being curious about who the other person was becoming. We had settled into a kind of pleasant distance that masqueraded as contentment. We had sex occasionally, but it had become a routine, something we did because we were supposed to, not because we actually desired each other. We had conversations, but they were mostly about logistics. Who was picking up the kids? What was for dinner? Did the car need an oil change? We didn't talk about how we were really feeling. We didn't talk about what we wanted. We didn't talk about our fears or our dreams or the ways we had changed. We had become roommates who shared a bed, partners in the logistics of life but not in any meaningful emotional way. I didn't realize how invisible I had become until someone came along and looked directly at me and really saw me. And when they saw me, something inside me woke up. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time began to stir. And suddenly, I couldn't unsee what I had learned to see. I couldn't unfeel what I had allowed myself to feel. I couldn't go back to being invisible once I realized what it felt like to be seen. I realized that I had been sleeping. Not literally sleeping, but living my life in a kind of daze, going through the motions, doing what was expected, never really engaging fully with my own existence. And then romance woke me up. It made me aware of how much I was missing. How much beauty was passing me by because I was too focused on taking care of everyone else. How much of my own life I was not living. That's when the real work began. That's when the real transformation started. Because romance didn't save me. Romance didn't complete me. Romance didn't give me strength that I didn't already have. What romance did was reveal the strength that was already there, waiting underneath all the layers of expectation and obligation and learned helplessness. I started asking myself hard questions. What did I actually want? Not what was expected of me. Not what would make everyone else happy. But what did I actually want? What would my life look like if I prioritized my own needs as much as I prioritized everyone else's? What dreams had I put aside? What parts of myself had I abandoned? What would it look like to live authentically, to be myself completely, without apology? These questions terrified me. Because answering them meant acknowledging that I had spent 30 years living a life that wasn't fully mine. It meant admitting that I had made choices based on fear and conditioning rather than on what I actually wanted. It meant facing the possibility that the safe life I had built wasn't actually making me happy. It meant being willing to change, to take risks, to step into the unknown. It meant potentially losing the security and stability that I had worked so hard to create. But here's what I discovered through that process. When you start asking yourself these questions, when you start allowing yourself to want things for yourself, when you start believing that your needs matter, everything shifts. You don't have to leave your marriage or abandon your responsibilities or blow up your life. You just have to start being honest with yourself about what you need and what you want and what you deserve. I started small. I started taking time for myself without feeling guilty. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me, without immediately apologizing or explaining myself. I started pursuing interests that I had abandoned years ago. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college when I was young and believed I might become an artist. I bought canvases and paints and set up a little corner in my home where I could create without the pressure of producing something good. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to make something, to create something from nothing, to express myself through color and form and movement. I started reading books that interested me, not just the ones that were practical or helpful. I started reading novels that transported me, poetry that moved me, memoirs that made me feel less alone in my struggle. I started taking walks without checking my phone, without thinking about what I needed to accomplish, without planning the next meal or the next task. I started sitting quietly with my thoughts instead of filling every moment with productivity and obligation. I started paying attention to my body, to what felt good, to what made me feel alive. I started noticing the way sunlight came through the windows in the afternoon. I started paying attention to music and how different songs made me feel. I started noticing the beauty in small moments that I had been too busy to see before. I started dancing in my kitchen when no one was watching. I started laughing at things that made me happy instead of smiling politely at things that were expected to make me happy. And as I started doing these small things, something remarkable happened. I started feeling more alive. I started feeling more present in my own life. I started feeling like I had agency and power over my own choices. I started feeling like my life was something I was actively creating rather than something that was happening to me. The relationship that had sparked this awakening became more complicated as I changed. Because when one person in a partnership starts growing and changing, it disrupts the equilibrium. It challenges the dynamics that had been established. It requires the other person to grow and change as well, and not everyone is willing to do that. Richard didn't understand what was happening to me. He thought I was having some kind of crisis. He thought the romance was the problem. He wanted me to just get over it and go back to being the way I was before. But there was no going back. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unfeel what I had felt. I couldn't pretend anymore that invisible was the same as content. I had woken up to myself, and that awakening was irreversible. We had difficult conversations. Some of them were painful. Some of them revealed things that we had been avoiding for years. We learned that we wanted different things. We learned that we had grown in different directions. We learned that the comfortable partnership we had built was no longer enough for me. And through that complexity, through those difficult conversations and challenging moments, I learned something crucial about myself. I learned that I was strong enough to stand alone. I learned that my worth wasn't dependent on being in a relationship. I learned that I could survive heartbreak and loss and disappointment. I learned that I was capable of making hard choices based on what was true for me, not based on what was comfortable or expected or safe. I learned that at 50, I still had time to reinvent myself. I still had time to become who I was meant to be. I still had time to live the life I actually wanted rather than the life I thought I was supposed to want. And that knowledge was transformative. It gave me courage. It gave me clarity. It gave me permission to prioritize my own growth and my own happiness. It taught me that self-care isn't selfish. It taught me that having boundaries isn't mean. It taught me that saying no to things that don't serve you is actually an act of self-love and respect. It taught me that your needs matter just as much as anyone else's needs. It taught me that being true to yourself is more important than being liked. Let me tell you what I discovered about my hidden strength through this journey. I discovered that I was more resilient than I thought. I had survived difficult things. I had raised 5 children to adulthood. I had maintained a marriage for 30 years. I had navigated the complexities of family relationships and workplace dynamics and friendship. I had overcome challenges and learned and grown. And yet I had never acknowledged my own strength. I had attributed my survival to luck or circumstance or other people's help. I had minimized my own agency in my own story. But through this journey of romance and self-discovery, I started to see myself differently. I started to recognize my strength. I started to understand that I had been carrying a lot, managing a lot, surviving a lot, and the fact that I had done so with grace and kindness and integrity said something powerful about who I was. I realized that strength isn't about being tough or hard or unaffected. Real strength is about being vulnerable and authentic. Real strength is about being willing to look at yourself honestly. Real strength is about making choices that serve your own growth even when those choices are uncomfortable or unpopular. I discovered that I was more independent than I realized. I had always thought of myself as someone who needed to be in a relationship, who needed someone else to complete me, who wasn't whole on my own. But as I started spending time alone and discovering what I actually wanted, I realized that I could be fully, completely myself without needing anyone else to validate me or complete me. That independence didn't mean I didn't want connection. It meant that I could choose connection from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of need. That's a fundamentally different way of being in relationship. When you're coming from a place of wholeness, you can show up fully. You can be honest about your needs and your wants. You can negotiate and compromise without sacrificing yourself. You can love someone without losing yourself in the process. I discovered that I had desires and dreams and passions that hadn't died, they had just been waiting for permission to exist. I wanted to paint. I wanted to travel. I wanted to read books that challenged me. I wanted to have conversations that went deeper than the surface-level pleasantries I had become accustomed to. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be adventurous. I wanted to take risks. I wanted to surprise myself. I realized that I had interests and opinions and perspectives that were interesting. I had things to say. I had experiences that mattered. I had wisdom to share. I had value that went beyond what I did for other people. I was interesting as a human being, not just as a function or a role. I discovered that I was capable of being happy, truly happy, in ways that I had forgotten were possible. I could be happy sitting alone with a good book. I could be happy exploring a new place. I could be happy creating something with my hands. I could be happy in conversation with someone who was genuinely interested in who I was. I could be happy living life on my own terms, making decisions based on what felt true to me rather than on what was expected of me. I discovered that my body was mine. My sexuality was mine. My desires were legitimate and valid and worthy of honor. I was worthy of being touched and desired and seen as beautiful and desirable. That realization was shocking to me. I had internalized the message that my body was primarily functional, primarily for creating children and for taking care of others. The idea that my body could be a source of pleasure, that my sexuality was something beautiful and important, was almost revolutionary. I discovered that I could set boundaries and say no without feeling like I had failed somehow. I discovered that disappointing other people was sometimes necessary. I discovered that I couldn't make everyone happy, and that was okay. I discovered that my own happiness was just as important as everyone else's. Most importantly, I discovered that strength at 50 looks different than I had imagined. I had thought strength was about being tough, being hard, being unaffected by what other people thought or did. But I learned that real strength is about being vulnerable and authentic. Real strength is about being willing to look at yourself honestly and acknowledge what you see. Real strength is about making choices that serve your own growth even when those choices are uncomfortable or unpopular. Real strength is about learning and changing and becoming more fully yourself as you get older, not less. The journey of midlife reinvention that romance sparked in me has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. It required me to examine my marriage and be honest about whether it was serving me. It required me to have difficult conversations with Richard about what I needed and what I wanted. It required me to be willing to consider the possibility that we might not be right for each other, even though we had spent 30 years together. It required me to examine my relationship with my children and acknowledge that I had sometimes made their happiness more important than my own well-being. It required me to set boundaries and to be honest with them about the fact that I was going through a transformation. It required me to let them see me struggling and changing rather than always being the strong, reliable mother they were accustomed to. It required me to examine my friendships and be honest about which ones were actually serving me and which ones were just a matter of habit. It required me to start being more vulnerable with the people I cared about instead of always being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything. It required me to examine my career and ask myself whether I was doing work that was meaningful to me or whether I was just doing work that was expected of me. It required me to consider making changes, taking risks, pursuing different paths. It required me to believe that I deserved work that felt fulfilling, not just work that was respectable. It required me to examine my relationship with myself and acknowledge that I didn't like myself very much. I didn't respect myself. I didn't believe that I deserved good things. I had internalized the message that my job was to serve, and that service was its own reward, and I didn't need anything more. But through all of that examination and honesty and willingness to change, I started to experience my life differently. I started to feel more alive. I started to feel more present. I started to feel like I had agency and power. I started to feel like I was the author of my own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This journey didn't destroy my marriage or my family or my friendships or my career. It transformed them. Richard and I had to do some serious work to figure out what our relationship could be when I was no longer willing to be invisible. We had to learn to see each other differently. We had to learn to be honest about what we needed. We had to learn to be curious about each other again. We had to have conversations about whether we wanted to stay together, and if so, what that would look like. We had to acknowledge that the dynamic we had built, where I was the one who accommodated and he was the one who was accommodated, was no longer working. We had to figure out how to build a relationship where both of us were fully present, fully seen, fully valued. And through that work, our relationship became deeper and more authentic than it had been in years. Because it was no longer built on my willingness to sacrifice myself. It was built on two people choosing to be together, knowing themselves fully, and being willing to grow together. We still have challenges. We still have moments of misunderstanding. But now we face those challenges together, as two whole people, rather than as two people playing roles. My relationships with my children deepened too. Because I became a more authentic version of myself, they got to know the real me. They got to see their mother struggling and learning and changing. They got to see what it looks like to prioritize your own growth. They got to understand that loving themselves and honoring their own needs wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Michael learned that he didn't have to be strong for everyone else all the time. Emily learned that she didn't have to be the peacemaker. Daniel learned that his rebelliousness wasn't a flaw. Olivia learned that she could be independent and still be connected to family. Joshua learned that his quietness was okay, but he didn't have to hide his needs. My friendships became more genuine. Because I started being vulnerable instead of always being strong, people started being more vulnerable with me. We developed deeper connections. We had real conversations about things that mattered. We became friends in a more authentic way, rather than just following the habit of friendship. My career became more fulfilling. Because I was clear about what I wanted and what I didn't want, I was able to make choices that felt true to me. I started pursuing work that aligned with my values and my interests. I said no to opportunities that didn't serve me. I sought out projects that challenged me and excited me. And most importantly, my relationship with myself transformed. I started to like myself. I started to respect myself. I started to believe that I deserved good things. I started to live my life with intention and authenticity. I started to make decisions based on what was true for me rather than on what was expected of me. I started to believe that my needs mattered. I started to believe that I was worthy of love and respect and care, not because of what I did, but simply because I existed. Now at 51, I'm in a different place than I was at 50. I'm stronger. I'm clearer. I'm more authentic. I'm more alive. I'm not just managing my life. I'm actively creating it. I'm not just doing what's expected. I'm doing what feels true to me. I've learned that reinvention isn't just for young people. I've learned that your 50s can be the most empowering decade of your life if you're willing to do the work. I've learned that romance, or any catalyst that causes you to look at yourself honestly, can be transformative if you're willing to let it be. I've learned that hidden strength isn't really hidden at all. It's just been obscured by years of making yourself small and invisible. But it's there. It's waiting. All you have to do is decide that it's time to let it out. All you have to do is decide that you're worth seeing. All you have to do is start being honest with yourself about what you need and what you want. I've learned that being authentic is more important than being comfortable. Being true to yourself is more important than being liked. Living your own life is more important than living the life that's expected of you. I've learned that at 50, you don't have to apologize for changing. You don't have to justify your needs. You don't have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. You have the right to pursue your own growth, your own happiness, your own authentic life. And I've learned that other women need to hear this. Women in their 40s and 50s and 60s and beyond need to know that it's not too late. It's not too late to become who you want to be. It's not too late to pursue your dreams. It's not too late to live authentically. It's not too late to discover your hidden strength. That's why I'm sharing this story with you. That's why I'm being vulnerable and honest about my journey. That's why I'm talking about romance and self-discovery and midlife reinvention. Because I believe that every woman who hears this story will see something of herself in it. And I believe that if you see yourself in this story, you might be inspired to ask yourself the same hard questions I asked myself. What do you actually want? Not what's expected of you. What do you want? Who are you when you're not performing a role? Who are you at your core, stripped of all the ways you've learned to be useful and necessary? What dreams have you abandoned? What parts of yourself have you hidden? What would your life look like if you prioritized your own growth as much as you prioritize everyone else's? What strength are you hiding? What power do you possess that you haven't allowed yourself to use? These are the questions that changed my life. These are the questions that revealed my hidden strength. These are the questions that led me to reinvent myself at 50. And I'm inviting you to ask yourself these same questions. Not because romance has arrived in your life, though it might. But because you deserve to be authentic. You deserve to live intentionally. You deserve to discover your own hidden strength. You deserve to reinvent yourself as many times as you need to. You deserve to become who you're meant to be. And you deserve to do it unapologetically, without guilt, without shame, without worrying about what everyone else thinks. Your 50s, or your 40s, or whatever decade you're in right now, can be the most empowering chapter of your life. But only if you're willing to do the work. Only if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Only if you're willing to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be and become who you actually want to be. That's the message I want to leave you with. That's the truth that romance revealed to me. That's the hidden strength that was waiting inside me all along, and it's waiting inside you too. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 51 years old. And I'm just getting started.